dropping in on you from the Heritage Tree people.
Oh, that's a
Clinic one there. And apparently Francesca had done the same thing about a week after or before, because we were talking, how did you know about this? Oh, yeah, I dropped in. I said, me too. Poor person.
And so, thanks, take it away. We'll just make this very informal.
Great.
Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think I'll just start by introducing myself and my background and kind of explain what we're up to and go from there a little bit, and then answer any questions that you may have.
Just make sure your red light's on your mic
Okay.
so we can pick
It
up
is,
your
yes.
voice. Okay.
I think
and
it
you
is.
want to keep your mouth fairly close to the mic.
Fairly close,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. Thanks.
So my name's Rodney Walters, and I have been an arborist my entire life. I started working in arboriculture, working for my father when I was 14 years old. And so that's what I learned how to do before I went to school, to learn how to do a few other things. I have a background in education. I was the lead arborist for Montana State University. And then I had an assistantship opportunity at Virginia Tech, which I accepted, and I earned a master's degree in forestry and urban forest ecology and management. So basically, I have been trained. I have experience and training in urban forestry, and so I'm qualified to be a city forester or a city arborist or something of that sort. So with that in mind, it's a real joy to be here and kind of learn a little bit about Oregon City. I am very interested in getting to know you folks more and more over the years and working with you. As far as our program at Clackamas Community College, I was hired there. I'm in my second year there, and I was hired to put together an arboriculture program for the horticulture department, which we are engaged in. The program has been official for since last March, so our curriculum has been accepted. I did pass around our curriculum and then just some advertising materials in the form of a flyer and a brochure. I believe the brochure, I didn't orient the landscape just right, and it's upside down when you look inside.
No, we'll figure it out.
Appreciate it. So I'm excited about this program. Arboriculture and other landscape professions are in very, very high demand. Arboriculture is in high demand across the country, internationally, and around the world. It's a very highly specialized skill set. It involves both physically challenging activities, as well as a lot of analysis, evaluation, and critical thinking. And so arborists basically go on two tracks. One would be working with trees, pruning them, climbing them, removing them, those sort of activities. The other would be plant health care, where they are looking at trees, evaluating them, diagnosing them, treating them. Arboriculture careers, basically the career track, everybody starts by dragging brush on the ground for somebody, processing brush, assisting the arborist. Then they'll move into being an arborist trainee, where they're sending up tools to the arborist, anticipating what the arborist needs, learning how to climb and do activities themselves. And then the arborist is usually a crew lead. That's the entry into the field of arboriculture. That takes place in three specific areas: private, commercial, municipal, and utility. Beyond that, it becomes a little more specialized. The crew leads will become managers or business owners, salespeople, regional managers, etc. There are also some specialty areas with arboretums, botanical gardens, nonprofit organizations where arborists may find employment. Then you have consulting arborists. These are arborists who've been in the profession long enough that they are highly respected. They have a large body of knowledge within them. They have the connections and the networking, and they're able to help advise businesses, landowners, municipalities on different aspects of tree management. Then there is the research. There's education and research. So there are positions for people ranging, for people who haven't completed high school, right up through the PhD and beyond levels. So it's really been a wonderful career for me. It has always offered a lot of challenges, a lot of opportunities. It's the type of work that you work hard, but it's also engaging, and that generally the projects are changing a lot. So there's always these new cycles of challenges coming with it. Because the demand is so high, I guess I'll speak to what it looks like for prospective employees in the Portland area. Basically, the entry-level wages are $14 to $18 per hour. The assistant wages are $18 to $24 per hour, and then the leads will be making $24 to $30 per hour on average. Beyond that, folks have to find their niche, their specialties, where they're more valuable.
What is the average age of someone who's starting in this career?
It varies. The young men can do a little better. There's also a lot of technique. So I'm still climbing trees, and I'm going up in trees with students and talking them through the process, and, helping them to breathe through it, and explaining what to do next. The gear has really changed and improved dramatically over the last 20 years, and so it has become less of a matter of sheer strength and more of a matter of technique and equipment. So it is a very equipment-intensive field, and we spend a lot of money on gear and equipment.
Okay. Well, part of the reason that we were interested in talking to you about this was because of our Heritage Tree program, and the potential for partnering with the program to get a more expert idea of the health of certain trees that are nominated, and by doing so, incentivize more people to actually do this program, because it's a voluntary program. But currently we require an arborist report for that. Depending on the willingness of the property owner to pay for all of the costs of the tree, that may be a barrier, or they might have the means to do it on their own, So, and we do currently allow nominations on public property as well. The process for nomination of a heritage tree involves a recommendation from this body, the NRC, Natural Resources Committee, and based on the criteria that we have in the code.
Okay.
The criteria that we have are divided into a couple of sets. You have a site and condition set of criteria, which all have to be met. And then you have the actual heritage tree criteria, which is how the tree subjectively, adds to the heritage of Oregon City in some way, either through where it is, or who planted it, or what type of tree it is. It's got some heritage value, which is, not all those criteria have to be met, but there's, so those. So, and then once the NRC has decided that a tree is worth recommending, based on all the information that we get, that would go up to the city commission, who makes a final decision. And the tree is listed and actually legally protected through a restrictive covenant on the property that runs with the land. And subsequently, that means that if anybody were to develop that property in the future, the tree itself would be protected. And that the bar that we, the regulatory barrier or bar that you have for removal of that tree is going to be based on a clear indication that the tree is at the end of its life and potentially a hazard, rather than just being removed for the development of the property. So those sorts of things. And currently we had 5 heritage trees, but one was blown
It was blown down during the wind, it
and it had to
split.
be cut down, and that was the sugar maple.
It has a sugar maple on it, I want to say 715 Fifth Street?
It was on a historic
Yeah.
property. Yeah.
It's right next to the Abernathy Center.
And so we now have 4, and the city commission a few years back designated Waterboard Park as a grove or a stand, and so. So that's where we're at right now with the program.
And what we found is
Yeah.
because we have several of them in the works to be submitted, like the Oregon City Pool, there's a couple of trees there. And then there's several private property owners. It's just prohibitive since we had one blow down. We just now have to really stick to the arborist report. Because that one was sent through without one because it has been looked at many times and was cabled up and it was, so.
Yeah,
And he had all intentions of making sure it was in good shape,
yeah,
so
yeah.
that's too bad.
So the fact that it
So
came
it's
down,
a real stumbling block for us, being able to get an arborist report. It's
Right,
cost
right.
prohibitive to the owner and to the city.
Yeah. And, there's several ways to look at it. From the one perspective, when the program began, it was a very simple set of code, basically, and it didn't provide all of these things that we currently require. It didn't have a legal protection mechanism. It didn't have a process or set of criteria other than it's an important tree. And it was completely voluntary, and it was confined to private property. So that's just,
Oh, okay, I didn't know that.
yeah.
Because I must have started when it was.
And it was, so,
city and
that's
private.
kind of how things have changed. But we didn't get any designations,
Yeah,
back then either. So if you compare it to other programs that are heritage tree or like the county, I think they do all the nominations at once, and it's strictly an honorary sort of designation, and it's completely voluntary. And I don't believe they have any requirement like an arborist report or something like that, but they would want some basic information about the tree and the age of it and its species and
Right.
all that. And I believe the county's not taking any nominations at the moment. Oh, one moment. Oh, that'll come later. I don't believe their program's up and running right now.
that's too bad.
I'm not sure why that
Yeah.
is. But, yeah. So they're not taking any further nominations. Our program runs, right now, if a nomination comes in, we'll process it, and we have a timeline to process it, but we treat it kind of like an application that we would get for development, which we're not going to take it forward until we have everything we need, which includes this arborist report.
okay.
So,
So it really did no good to keep turning them in. So,
yeah.
because
Now, are these aligned at all with the big tree programs or champion tree programs?
No. The quote unquote big tree program was a city manager oriented directed program where they put 50 grand into the city general fund to plant really big trees throughout the city. And what's happened now is that money is in the Parks Department, and it's still oriented towards that goal. But I think it's also oriented towards assisting with tree maintenance on
Okay.
public lands. So that's the current status of that. We did successfully plant some big trees, but we also ran into situations where the trees were just not going to be appropriate for the planting area that they were in. So there was some practical considerations that the program didn't take into account and should reasonably be discussed. So that's the current direction from the current city commission and that sort of thing. So my hope going forward is that we can find as many ways as we can to incentivize the Heritage Tree Program.
Yes.
And the difficulty for the planning division is that we just don't have the resources to, fund something like this right now. So it's either going to have to come from a grant program that's, initiated, or it'll have to be some, volunteer donated type thing, time. Or we change the code entirely to get rid of the arborist report aspect of it. And then if we do that, we need to think hard about what the criteria are for the designation and if there is any liability associated with that. And I don't know. That's a question we haven't asked.
So trees do always involve both benefits and risks. And,
Right.
And, I can understand how the arborist report would help to address some of those potential risks. And it makes a lot of sense to do that. And also having the qualified arborist is a big piece of that. So I think I had this conversation with somebody, like the question was, would some of our students be able to do some of this work?
And me too, I think.
Several of us.
In the initial email.
And quite honestly, I don't know if our students, most of them, some of them, we may have, some people working in the field who comes to the program for some reason or another, but for the most part, I don't know if our students would have the experience to be able to do that well.
I wasn't sure if they had to do, if there was an end project, so they know that they can get their license as an arborist, or if there is a internship they have to do with another arborist for a certain period of time, and that maybe you can wrap into a program where they take on volunteer community service for a scholarship program or some bump in something.
Some service work. I love the idea of service work. In some ways, the incentivization, I can see some of that coming through business owners. So perhaps an arborist company wants to sponsor a heritage tree, and I do work with companies, and I know.
And I think we should sell bragging rights.
Yes.
You know the company. I said, I want to buy a Dorothy tree or a Dee Dee tree. But no, I mean, yeah.
I could easily see
Groves
an
and stuff, 'cause we have-
arboriculture company doing that for a multitude of reasons. There's also, I'm not really familiar with the business climate here, but anything where you would have a bed and breakfast or some sort of tourist component, some sort of hosting environment, being able to talk about, to tell a story about a tree on the property goes a long way toward being able to create an image and to provide some continuity.
Like
for
the
business.
hotel that was coming in has that great big wonderful tree there. They had to have an arborist report done on.
And in those ways, those companies can leverage those situations for advertising, right?
Yeah, I mean, the aspect of, that's really good, and I want to definitely come back to that. But I just wanted to briefly interject. So when the city planning department receives a land use application, that from that point forward, any trees currently existing on the site are considered regulated. It doesn't mean necessarily protected, but you're going to have to inventory every tree over 6-inch diameter and tell us the condition. And then based on that, whether the tree is removed or not triggers a certain amount of mitigation. And then currently, those trees are considered part of the landscape plan that goes with that development and have to be maintained. There's some discussion back and forth depending on your goals for site development, whether those trees need to be permanently protected or not, because they're a dynamic aspect of the landscape. So that's something, but currently we require that those trees be protected by a covenant as well, which is another, that's a layer of regulation that currently exists. We haven't mapped every property that has covenants on it, so, but we know we have a ton of subdivisions and a ton of site plans out there, which we have deed restrictions on for certain trees. But the property owners may or may not know that that is in existence. So there's a geographic mapping component to this as well. And, so as well as some legal covenants that are recorded with Clackamas County, so, yeah. And with that covenant basically says, if this tree is removed, it's going to have to be replaced pursuant to our current code. It can't just be removed. So
Okay.
it's as close as we come realistically to having a process like Portland's, where you've got a type 1 permit for a type of removal over the counter, or if you have more than 3 or over a certain diameter, you have to go up to a type 2 level with public notice and that sort of thing. We don't currently have anything like that because it's pretty staff intensive. And also, there's been a conscious decision not to interfere too much with private property owners and their right to manage their own property. For residential property mostly. I mean, commercial property is, you got formal landscaping areas and that sort of thing. Anyway, I don't want to go too into detail on that. What's that?
When you do your arborist program and or evaluations or part of the teaching, with just the health of the tree, do you also study the health of the ecosystem around it? Because some trees are just a pleather for.
Yes, so the site that a tree is located on is critical, and knowing the history of the site is critical. So trees do not like disturbance; they don't respond well to it, and a lot of times previous activities can reduce the tree's stability potential and also their long-term health. So. The more information that we can find out about the site, the more we know about what the likelihood of the tree to thrive is.
I was also thinking that sometimes, like along our waterfront, water walkway, we'll have a great big giant snag there because that's a huge nesting spot and things. I was just wondering if those kind of things are taken into consideration when you're teaching it. I was sorry to see that we lost the tallest tree on the top of our hill because it was cracked a curb. And I think it cracked that curb. But it wasn't, it was the tallest tree in the hill. I'm sure there's some very big birds that needed that tree. But I just kind of wonder if that's part of it because Metro has, when they take an arborist, they take a biologist also. I just kind of...
So wildlife trees are something that we discuss and that I educate our students about. I don't have experience with wildlife trees in this area. I did write about it quite a bit in my stewardship plan for the old growth forest fragment that I wrote for Virginia Tech. And those are always considerations.
I read that. That was really good.
Thank you.
I quoted you. We're heritage trees. That's why I went, oh, you're that guy.
And so when you're managing these natural areas, you're looking at the climate and you're looking at the entire climate. So you're looking at the ecosystem, but you're looking at the political, legal climate. You're looking at the resources that the community has based on the values and beliefs that the community has. And so it becomes this process. It works best when it's collaborative, but there is a process involved in how those issues are addressed. And so, it really is a matter of what the decision makers want and what their choices are, and what process is involved in coming to those decisions.
Okay.
I don't know, Peter, Dee Dee, do you know if there's like resources for homeowners about trees, about tree maintenance and things like that, especially related to the heritage trees or potential heritage
State
trees?
Extension Service, I talked to them about every single tree of my yard and taken them samples.
Yeah.
And that's,
I think there's a lot out there. We've tried to link to the ones that we know of. Oregon State Extension Service and Friends of Trees has good resources. Trees Are Good organization, the Arbor Day Foundation, all have good
You're
stuff.
shaking your head, so those are all.
There's a wealth of information.
Okay, good. So I was wondering if there was any other like collaboration there, any other resources you could provide that might be able to go out to homeowners or.
Yeah, I mean, we have
part of
that pretty much on our, generally, when you click on trees on the city planning department website under natural resources, it comes up and we have links. So it's all a question of how deep you want to go.
Sure.
yeah.
But, and then trying to keep those current. We also do link to the International Society Arboriculture Pacific Northwest Chapter's website, because we want people, we recommend strongly that people who are having tree work done get a certified arborist to do it. Whether it's taking a tree down or making a recommendation about pruning or even planting or whatever. So, and we also try to coordinate that with our Public Works Department as well. So by that, I'm talking about the city rights of way, or in Oregon City, PGE is a franchisee, and we control franchisees in our right of way. So power line management and maintenance, what we're trying to do going forward in 2018 is do a much better job of having a coordinated plan with PGE for what ought to be planted under power lines, what's appropriate, and then if it comes to the need for removal or heavy canopy pruning or topping, then that's something that I think the federal communications, statutes are going to preempt local
Yes,
rules on.
that is true.
And that's something that a lot of people don't understand. That's something we're going to have a discussion about. So that'll be a 2018 thing that we're going to try to work out with PGA, and the more information that all of the staff has about that, the better.
There are some very good lists of appropriate trees to plant under power lines. There's been a lot of research done. There are pretty fantastic.
Okay, good. Yeah, I'd love
resources
to get a hold of
available.
those. The forester we talked to, I forget his name, but yeah, he's one of the foresters at PGA. So, and he'd sent me an email with some bullet points from our discussion. We had Martin Montalvo, who's our Public Works Operations Manager.
Yes, I know Martin.
Was at that meeting. So good. Yeah, I think we can move forward with that as a side plan. The other thing that Oregon City doesn't have currently is any kind of forestry plan, a cohesive forestry plan, or urban canopy plan, or whatever you want to call it. But we have a lot of different people and a lot of different departments doing various things. And we are a Tree City USA for the last 5 years. So we're meeting those criteria. And then as part of that, we have to have a yearly plan going forward. So the other thing that we did is we have an ongoing contract with Friends of Trees. And we just had our neighborhood planting 2 weeks ago. We planted 80 trees. And I've got 20 more to plant. So, and that's paid for and subsidized through our tree mitigation fund, which is a development fund that planning actually controls. Yay! So, yeah, so if you have to mitigate for a tree and you can't plant it, you pay a fee in lieu. And that's about $308 a tree, $309 a tree right now.
Okay.
Which we based on some estimates that we got from arboriculture companies and landscaping companies based on what does a 2-inch caliper tree cost to buy, transport, and plant in the first 2 years,
The PNW also has a booklet that has the average cost for.
Oh,
I could provide that information. It's actually higher than that. So that would cover the cost of the material. It doesn't sound like it factors the labor in.
yeah, okay. We figured it was pretty low.
I know
We tried
I'm,
telling the
it's a
homeowner
little
that.
lower. Yes. But the PNW is a great resource, and
Okay.
it's been researched and debated, and
Yeah,
so I'll send that to somebody. You can send me an email.
Yeah.
I'll send it to you.
I'll send it around.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think we can, anything that we can do to beef up our website and provide those links, we can do that.
Okay.
Yeah.
this is going to be off task, but it has something to play, it has something to do with trees. But when people are doing developments, I know that there'll be a covenant to save like a wonderful oak or a great big fir that might be there. But there are plenty of them that were strawberry fields. And when that development goes in, you
Which
get
one?
those.
Which,
I'm just saying any development.
okay.
I use strawberry fields because that's what used to be out in South End Road.
okay, that's a
And-
great subdivision.
And it's right up there. So anyway, but they get such mono plantings in their neighborhood. You get sweeping leaf maple or whatever.
Yes.
I'm just kind of wondering if you couldn't say,
That's a good question.
no matter what with that thing, let us amongst your development choose a place where we're going to stick a nice big red oak that will get 150 foot tall in 20 years or 50 years or something, where they're going to get substantial trees that you're going to look at and go, oh my God, isn't that a beautiful tree? And all the other ones are just going to be little puffballs all around the neighborhood. But you're going to have a couple of big, giant trees. Like what we have in our neighborhood that I look at and I'll
Right.
just cry if it ever goes. I mean,
Yeah.
could we put like something like at least a suggestion in there saying, okay, you've done this arborist report on those trees. That one tree is pretty significant. Be good on you if you would make that a heritage tree. If you're going to go talk about your development, here's your application. And by the way, here's a couple of tall trees because there's some people out there that are aching for tall trees in our city. We're losing them all.
Well, you bring up a very good point. Ideally, you should have a diversity of family, genus, species. You should also have an age diversity, and you should have a size diversity.
Yeah.
When you have those, you have a much more resilient urban forest.
You also wrote about just the watershed and what one tree will do with its thousands of gallons of water that
Thousands
develop into
upon thousands.
hundreds of thousands of gallons of water. We're seeing some of that effect right now in Waterboard. We've lost a big tree up there, and it's, I think, I can't say what it's from. Could be from the ivy. It's all over it. But yeah, that was fascinating.
And there are-
but it is so. And if somebody knows that when they're going into it, and you say, well, this is our kind of our hope. Our
Yes.
developer's going to say, I'll put that tree in there, and they'll gripe about it in the 60 years.
So if you go to iTrees, it's a USDA website, and they are tools. They're application tools. Some are PC based. They're planning tools. Some of them are professional level. Some of them are for homeowners. And they are scientifically accurate calculators. And so these are based upon averages across the entire United States. It has credibility, and you can calculate the benefits of the tree in monetary terms, and they take into account
Yeah, you have that in your
pollution-
paper too. There's a whole calculation on it.
There's and the beautiful part about that is you enter the data, and the applications do the mathematics for you, and they're valid. So they're accounting for energy savings, CO2 capture, pollution mitigation, a pretty wide range of benefits that the trees will provide. And then they will also provide, so they'll provide the the poundage of these materials that are sequestered or that are captured, and they will also provide a monetary value for those benefits.
I remember that, doing the calculation monetary value, because I told somebody that was the price of their value of their tree, and they had, and I said, well, that's a little calculation thing I did. And it directly relates to the real estate value of your home,
So that would
which
be
was over 15% of the value of their person's home.
Yes,
which is real estate value.
That would be a different process. So there's also a way to appraise your trees. And the Council of Landscape Appraisers has a method. It's the trunk formula method. I have calculators set up in Excel.
And that'd be different from the forest, because I would assume it would be a completely different type of calculation.
It is for rural trees specifically. And they take into account the maintenance of the tree, the risks of the tree as it gets older. So as the tree gets older, they do pose more risk. They also
I think you might have one student who might want to take on that challenge. Some of our significant trees on our public properties.
So these are things I love to do and I'm very good at doing. The truth is that the city, my opinion is that the city would be, so we're happy to take on one tree at a time during a class and to, practice and evaluate and examine it. We did that with a tree on campus. The students got to know that tree very, very well. We performed maintenance on the tree and we posed recommendations as well. It's a nice mature deodar cedar, and we evaluated it. We basically did an average, but it came in around $32,000 is the value of the tree, and it provides a certain amount of benefits per year above that appraised value. So you have the appraised value, but then you have the ecological, the environmental benefits that it provides. And that's where you have the stormwater capture, you have the CO2 sequestration, you have the pollution mitigation, and other benefits as well.
I want to take that class.
So my recommendation for Oregon City would be to procure professional services, to start thinking about that in the long range planning. So many cities will hire an urban forester. If Oregon City is able to do that, I would recommend it. Not all municipalities are able to do that. There are also companies like the Davie Resource Group that will provide those services for municipalities. They can do it. They can provide these services and provide them very efficiently and effectively. And they are trained to look at the forest as a whole. So then they're able to make recommendations holistically and not just, so our students would be limited to this one site, this one tree, and they wouldn't be able to see the big picture as well. And we're happy to participate in that.
And there's that wonderful guy that they gave that presentation
I'm writing this all down.
from Metro that was talking about our GSI system or their GSI system.
GIS.
You know me. Where they were measuring the height and width and that itself, and just doing a surveillance would be.
Yes, so a tree inventory is a starting place, and it really is an important step. And so you were talking about a management plan, and a tree inventory are the places where a city forester would start. And then from there, that inventory becomes a management tool, a management and maintenance tool. And it will begin to inform decisions. So you begin to accrue a body of knowledge, data, information, and then that helps to inform planning moving forward, and it helps to allocate resources for the maintenance. So one of the realities of the trees is that they do all require, in an urban setting, they require a certain amount of maintenance, and that maintenance does have a cost. A good urban forester will take a look at the asset. They will begin to inform decisions that will, over time, will reduce the costs and increase the benefits of that urban forest. And in that, from a urban forestry perspective, is a 40-year process. So an urban forester is going to be managing for the long term with those resources.
Great.
Was that iTree?
iTrees.
iTree,
Yes.
so capital I or EYE?
ITREE.
Okay.
Small I, capital TREE.
Perfect, thanks.
And that's a USDA through the Urban Forestry Division.
Great. Thank you for all those great advice.
Thank you so
And,
much.
I'm hopeful that we could maybe invite you back and we can proceed and follow through on some of these things.
Absolutely. I'd
Yeah.
love to participate.
Is an urban forester somebody you need to have working full-time? Or is that something that you can get a Metro grant or a grant on for
It
for an
depends
urban
on,
forester?
it really is going to
Targets.
depend on, each community is going to be different, I think.
Okay.
It really is. They're managed, the tree assets are managed in a very wide variation of,
Yeah.
so some cities will manage them through their streets department as street trees. Some of them will manage them through their parks departments. Others will have a separate forestry department. And it just really depends on
Yeah.
the
Resources.
the resources and the local involvement as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah, I mean, currently planning manages the permitting for the street trees, but I would honestly say that we are, we're not trained as foresters or arborists. And all the budding property owner is responsible for that tree. And they're also responsible for the maintenance of the sidewalk. And what we see is
The
sidewalk
conflict.
problems. Yeah,
Yes.
that conflict. It's
So
an
that's-
inherent conflict.
Yes, so that conflict exists all the way across the nation, and there are ways to deal with that. And of course, there's upfront costs. So tree selection is an important piece of that. Some trees will be more deep rooted; they won't lift the sidewalks. Some areas will have special chambers where the roots have room to grow without infringing upon the sidewalks. So when those activities are coordinated, it can work very, very well. When they're not, you can end up with a lot of problems with cracked and broken and lifting sidewalks.
Yeah, this committee, we updated our street tree list in 2012, and then, that was what we thought was best at the time, and we had a certified arborist on the Natural Resources Committee at that time, Eric Carr, who's now with the county. And he was with Soil and Water District, right? Yeah. So that was very helpful, and then we vetted the list around some other folks in the region who are arborists as well, and Friends of Trees and those people. So, but yeah, I mean, there's a limited number of trees that are going to do well in a 2.5 foot planter strip.
Well, that's a big part of that. So
Yeah.
ideally, 8 feet is what you need to facilitate a large size street tree.
Yeah, right, exactly. And I was at a conference a few years back when they were looking at, I think Tigard or Tualatin, and they had a soil volume requirement for any trees that were planted.
Yes.
And I don't know what the current status of that is and if that's working out well, or but I'd like to check into that.
So
Yeah.
one of the so there are different ways to facilitate that, but you can design chambers, underground chambers that act as a type of a bioswale. So they will have a stormwater runoff mitigation well, yeah, it's a water mitigation, or it's a runoff mitigation, but it's also a pollution control as well, and it can serve those functions. And it can look like a tree, just with it looks like a tree in a sidewalk, but there's soil underneath that. They design those with permeable surfaces, and then so the tree can receive water and nutrients. So there's ways to accommodate that, but there is also a cost involved with that as well.
Right. So, yeah, like the waterfront, we've got basalt and there's no soil. But we might want trees in the future if there's redevelopment, so. All right, thanks.
Thank you so
Thank you
much.
very much
Thank
for
you.
coming.
Appreciate that. Big tree program.
Thanks, good stuff, yeah. So, thanks,
Change
Sam,
my mantra from
for
tall trees
waiting.
to big tree. Change my mantra from tall
I'll
tree
get
to big
you
tree.
your. Our next presenter is Sam Leininger with Clackamas Soil and Water Conservation District Weedwise Program. He's got a presentation.
And some handouts here too, so we can shoot some.
Oh, great.
There's some right there.
I was gonna say, go to the agenda. There you go.
Let's try both. I think it's this one. But take both with you and we'll see which one works. I think that's what connects it to.
I think that's what goes in the machine.
Oh, okay. I don't know. I'm gonna get this up and we can try it.
Okay.
You see that real quick.
It's gonna make you guys careen around here, I guess, on the.
We have it in front of us too. Can you see my glasses?
Okay,
It is.
right. Man, multitasking.
Good deal.
All right.
All right, so thank you guys for inviting me out here today. I think I was on the agenda, or supposed to be on the agenda for November, but it was nice to hear that I was actually bumped by the Backyard Habitat Certification Program.
Yeah,
So,
that was way cool.
you know, my program's actually been a sponsor for the expansion into Clackamas County, so I am more than happy to be bumped by Susie and the Backyard Habitat Program, and I can't speak more highly of their activities as well. So. I appreciate you guys having them out to discuss their program and potential expansion or planned expansion into Oregon City this spring. So thank you for that. So my name's Sam Leininger. I'm here with the Clackamas Soil and Water Conservation District's Weedwise program. So I've been with the Weedwise program since 2009. The program was initiated in 2009. We are a part of the Soil and Water Conservation District, so you know, we're here as a service district to the residents of Clackamas County. We are independently governed, so we're not part of the county. We're actually a special service district. And we are non-regulatory, so we're here really, we're kind of all carrot, no stick when it comes to natural resource related issues and invasive plants. And one of our kind of core things that we deal with are technical assistance to landowners. So people come to us with, you know, various questions related to different activities on their property, and we can provide assistance to them. And then we also carry out some on the ground implementation of invasive plant work through the weed program. So. And then one of the other pieces that we do that I'll get into in more detail is just working collaboratively with regional partners related to all sorts of invasive plant issues. So I'm going to be switch through here. So I'm sure you guys are probably familiar, but, you know, just for the sake of folks watching at home too, in terms of invasive plants, you know, the thing about invasive plants is they really have kind of three characteristics. They're not native to our area. They exhibit an aggressive growth habit, and they have a detrimental impact on the landscape. And so these three components are really what we use when we're talking about invasive plants rather than, you know, kind of some other terms. So some of the other terms that are bounced around that are maybe relevant to the discussion tonight, just to make sure that we're careful about what specifically we're talking about, is, you know, there's the term weeds, and weeds can really be any plant that people don't really want in that particular location. So it could be desirable in another location, but here it's maybe not. And then we've also got non-native plants, so plants that are just not native to the area historically. And then invasive plants that have an aggressive growth. And then the two kind of key plants that folks tend to use are noxious plants, and noxious typically are state-listed noxious weeds. So those usually derive from the Oregon State Weed Board that lists those plants on behalf of the state. And then nuisance plants, which are typically designations by municipalities or local entities. So, so why should we really be concerned about invasive plants? You know, they're just a plant, you know, no big deal, right? Well, they can actually have a very substantial impact on our landscape. They alter our habitat structure, habitat function. They can pose a threat to human health and property. We were talking a lot about trees here today, and some of the invasive trees can cause the same kind of issues. They also increase the cost of our food, harm our local economy, and as a native Oregonian, they also result in a landscape that's really less Oregon-like. And I think that's something that's kind of hard to quantify sometimes, but I think it's just as relevant to you know our ethic in care and stewardship of our natural resources. So I wanted to just kind of give you guys a little bit of numbers about how much of an issue invasive plants really are. So the Oregon Department of Agriculture did a economic assessment for native plant or invasive plants recently. I think it was maybe 2 years ago. And they looked at just 25 of the state listed, I believe it's 121 state listed noxious weeds. Just 25 of those selected noxious weeds resulted in $83.5 million a year in loss damage to the state's economy. And they also predicted what would that loss be if no action was taken to actually suppress or control those invasive plants. And they found that ultimately that would result in a current dollar value of $1.83 billion a year if the invasive plants are not kept in check. And nationally, they're looking at invasive species, so both plants and animals. Currently, they're expected to cost the U.S. Economy $143 billion per year. So big numbers that we're talking about, and substantial to our local economy. So who has invasive plants, right? Like, I deal with these things all the time, so I kind of know. Everybody does. So this is actually a weed map from the Oregon IMAP invasives. And it's actually dated now. The database is a little bit further along to the point that they can't really even generate this map in the database anymore. But it just shows you that we really got weeds everywhere that we're at. So, you know, it's okay to talk about it. You don't have to feel guilty about having invasive plants. Everybody has them, you know, so we just kind of need to be aware of that and start thinking about how we can mitigate some of these damages that these plants are actually inflicting on the landscape. So what do we do about them, right? You know, we've got all these problems, in this case, ivy, which I know Oregon City has a fairly substantial ivy population. You know, so within the WeedWise program, you know, we deal with a lot of different things in terms of invasive plants, and you know, and coming in 2009 and developing a program about how do we address these things, you know, in terms of our resources and that sort of thing. You know, kind of the first kind of core thing was really just service and assistance to landowners. So this was a big portion of the Soil and Water Conservation District's historical role within the county. And so we really wanted to make that a forefront of our program. So, you know, we routinely provide technical assistance to landowners. So people walk into the office, give us a call, you know, email us. I've got this plan. I don't know what it is. What should I do about it? All those sorts of things. We'll provide technical information to them, you know, review the plants that they bring in, all those sorts of things to help them to address those invasive plant issues on their property. And we do have some financial resources through the district to help with some of those. In particular, within the WeedWise program, we've got some resources for what are deemed our priority weeds. And so last year, in terms of technical resource to Clackamas County landowners, we documented 2,888 residents that we assisted last year, and as well as did a number of mailings to households in Clackamas County.
I got your mailings.
Did you?
Yep.
Oh, good. Good.
Be careful. You're walking distance from my house, too. I'll bring you every little weed I got.
Yeah, well, that's the way it works.
You and the Extension Service.
That's the way it works. So in addition to kind of our general technical assistance, you know, I mentioned the weed control work that we'll do with private landowners through kind of projects related to priority weeds. So this is actually a blessed milk thistle patch. that was reported by a landowner in Wilsonville. And they approached us after she'd been dealing with it for about a decade, and had kind of thrown her hands up and like didn't know what to do. And her neighbor, which was a hay producer, had approached us about it as well. And so we started working with the landowner. She was very appreciative of our assistance. And because this is a relatively rare plant within the county and we don't have a lot of it, we deemed it a priority and really sought to affect some change. So within 1 year, so this is a before photo. I'm going to show you the after photo here. This is 1 year later after doing some invasive plant control out on this property. And that's my weed specialist, Jeff Lesh, our weed specialist, Jeff Lesh. And he's standing in front of the one plant that we had left on that site after 1 year of treatment. So, I mean, this is kind of an exceptional case, but, you know, it's one that we definitely want to highlight because, you know, a little active management can go a long way, you know, especially if it's done properly and with some forethought.
What did they replant?
So that's actually natural regeneration. That's not a replanting. So really just removing the weeds resulted in that. So
Okay. Interesting.
So another resource that we do provide landowners within Clackamas County is our weed equipment library. So we've got various weed pullers and those sorts of things that we actually loan out to folks free of charge. So they can just come in, sign out for one of our weed pullers and use those on their property. So we've got a number of the weed wrenches as well as several kind of similar tools, the extractiator, polar bears, uprooters. And then we've got some shrub busters and then also lake rakes. So people dealing with aquatic issues on their local ponds and that sort of thing helps them to address those in a mechanical way, especially for folks that have concerns about herbicide or pesticide use. So we also spend a great deal of time doing outreach and education because we really can't do it all. So we have to rely upon landowners and other land managers to do a great deal of the work on property that they own and manage. So we give presentations like the one here tonight. We also develop a lot of the fact sheets and information. So, you know, one of the fact sheets here that we gave you is our, you know, kind of our annual report that we did for the last fiscal year. So a lot of the numbers out of that are for our last fiscal year. The other mailing that we've got here that we're pulling for you is actually the mailing that we send out to landowners when we're trying to secure landowner permissions to control priority weeds. So it highlights, I believe, 12 of our priority weeds for Clackamas County. And so we generate a lot of that stuff, and it sounds like you got one of our mailings. My guess is it was probably a tansy ragwort mailing, but I'm not quite sure, but that would be my guess since we generated a lot of those last year.
It generated good stimulated talk in our household too.
Good, that's good. That's what we're looking for, and especially across fence lines. That's where we really like to have the discussions move, and I think they do help. So we do a lot of that. So, and then we also do press releases and news articles as appropriate. And then we do maintain an online presence like just about everybody anymore, both on our website, both the Conservation District's website, as well as a Weedwise specific website. And then we do have a social media presence because that's where everybody spends their time these days.
You do a newsletter. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
It's really real clean, concise. You can just like blow right through everything except for what you want to go to.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Thank you. So, and actually, here's a billboard that we did have up in Oregon City, I believe a couple years ago when the tansy was especially bad. We put this guy up on 99 heading towards Canby to kind of raise awareness about the tansy ragwort issue. Okay, so apart from service and assistance, you know, we also spend a lot of time thinking about assessment and prioritization. And this, I can't, you know, sometimes prioritization kind of gets like, oh, it's not boots on the ground stuff, you know, but honestly, from my perspective, it's really a way for us to be really impactful in the work that we do, especially given the limited resources that we have to address a problem as big as noxious weeds. And I'm sure, you know, from the city's perspective, with the amount of weeds in the city, you guys can absolutely relate to the resource limitation and the need to prioritize your various activities. So, but the reason to really, prioritize is, limited budgets, limited staff time, and really trying to be effective and efficient in terms of the work that you're doing. And for us, when we're dealing with kind of new and emergent threats all the time, it lets us be responsive to those by knowing, where in terms of our different priorities to spend our time. And if something new does pop up, to know whether it is important relative to the other work that we're already doing. So some of the ways that we prioritize our invasive plants, first is through our noxious weed plant list. So we do develop a plant list for Clackamas County. The state does have its state listed noxious weeds. The state list has Class A weeds, Class B weeds, and what are called Class T weeds or targeted weeds. We utilize all the Class A, so Class A weeds in Clackamas County are automatically priorities for the county. The Class A weeds have a mandatory treatment requirement associated with them. So if you do have Class A's, you're required to remove them from your property. But in addition to the Class A's for the Clackamas County list, we also include several Class B's that are not locally abundant. So plants that are still relatively rare where we can actually keep them out, so keep them from being the next blackberry or Scotch broom or ivy, that sort of thing. And so we do develop a local priority list for local land managers to really help them assess, what's really important on the landscape as a kind of a first priority for treatment and containment of noxious weeds. And we do a fair bit of coordination with our local cooperative weed management areas, both the 4-county cooperative weed management area, which serves the Portland metro region, as well as the Columbia Gorge cooperative weed management area, serving the Columbia Gorge, of which the Sandy River Basin is a portion of that area. So in addition to the priority weed list, we also maintain a database of weed points. So this is something we developed to really kind of gain an understanding of how the weeds are moving and traveling across the landscape. We've combined data that we've generated ourselves as well as data from additional partners. So really folks, land managers from across the region. Our database as of this afternoon had over 44,000 weed observations documented in it. And of those, 22,000 or 22,500 of those are priority weeds. And those are becoming increasingly more prevalent in our weed database because we are spending a lot of time actively documenting our priority weed species. And maybe not doing as well of documenting our more common species. It's almost easier to document where they're not in a lot of cases. So it's that sort of thing. So here's just a brief little map of the weed points that we do have documented in our database. The red dots on the map are priority weeds. Looks like it's kind of hard to see from the legend there. And the yellow is the kind of all observations. So you can see we've got a lot, kind of an overabundance of observations in and along our stream corridors, and that's really a legacy of where the resources for noxious weed work is really allocated. So a lot of it is for fish health and water quality issues. So I would say there's a disproportionate amount of weed control work that occurs on riparian and stream side areas compared to the rest of the county.
Yeah.
In terms of, we also look at prioritizing these various infestations. So we know the different locations that we're seeing these plants on the landscape, and we really think about, how best, like where should we be investing our times from a spatial perspective. So we definitely try to treat priority weeds, so those weeds that are listed as a high priority under our noxious weed list. We tend to focus on isolated patches where the chances for dispersal are relatively high. They have a greater impact on the intact areas in and around them. And then we also try to work across contiguous land parcels so that we can create a larger area of weed-free or controlled areas. And that's both an efficiency issue and also to reduce the potential dispersal back into an area. The other thing we look at is really our kind of high quality sites, so sites where we can actually have the greatest impact on the existing landscape. So thinking of like high quality natural areas that are maybe under threat, we can go in and actually preserve some rare habitat that maybe didn't exist, that maybe wouldn't exist otherwise. And then also thinking about how these weeds move across the landscape, so thinking about different vector pathways in which they move, so along streams, along road corridors. Parking lots may seem like a silly thing, but that's how we move these things around, is generally by people. So really thinking about how these things move across the landscape and trying to disrupt that connection between the movement of the plant and where it occurs. So here's an example of some of our local prioritization. In this example, we actually used what's called the Whippet model. It was a model that was created out of California by the California Department of Agriculture, and the California Invasive Plants Council has actually put it up on their website for use in California. We actually adopted it and reallocated it for use here in Clackamas County. And you can kind of see we've got different scores, different Whippet scores, where the reds are kind of the highest priorities. And what this model takes into account is both the potential invasiveness of the plant as well as its relative distance from dispersal vectors and its distance from co-occurring neighbors. So it kind of gives you, it looks like a shatter shot view of a bunch of weeds in a given area, but you can kind of see as you start to move from like a landscape level decision making towards a more site-based specific decision making about where you would maybe invest some of your resources if you were a landscape level land manager versus a site level land manager, and really, utilizing your limited resources in an area where you have really the highest potential to maximize your impact based on these Whippet scores. Mm-hmm. So in addition to the data that we create for Clackamas County, we also share those at the state level to help with decision making across the state. And so one of the databases that we support and submit our data to is Oregon IMAP Invasives. So this is a statewide database originally put together by the Oregon Invasive Species Council. And so we're big proponents of this and encourage the city to consider documenting any noxious weed sites that you may have on Oregon IMAP Invasives as well. And it is a free service. There's no fee based associated with it.
So you can just upload to it? Or?
So you can upload, even just by contacting the statewide coordinator, you can actually send the data set to her.
Okay.
So she can send all the information associated with, including any information you may have to Oregon IMAP Invasives. So in addition to that service assistance and the prioritization effort, we do spend a lot of time doing really landscape level management of invasive weeds and in particular priority invasive weeds. So one of the key strategies that we employ within the WeedWise program is a strategy called Early Detection and Rapid Response, or EDRR. And the idea is relatively simple. It's really, trying to prevent really that kind of foothold gain of invasive plants over time. So imagine a situation where, a remnant weed seed is on somebody's muddy shoe and they walk into a given area and, 2 years later, the place is covered with the stuff. So the idea behind early detection rapid response is really, having eyes on the ground to spot that one plant or two plants right off the start before it has a chance to really get that foothold and establish an area. So it's really trying to disrupt this pathway from a singular plant to a large infestation, and really, using the demographics of the weed itself to actually be efficient in terms of our use. So, warning, if you're averse to science, this one's coming. So this is actually an adapted management curve from Hobbs and Humphrey's article from 1995. And what it shows is an idealized establishment of invasive plants into a given area. So let's see if I got a laser here. Is this... So sorry, I'm going to make it careen around. So at this lower end, you can see this kind of introduction event in the lower left-hand corner. And then you see really a logistic growth curve as the plant's coming up. And think about the population size of the plant coming up until it reaches this what's called carrying capacity. Or really think of that as like saturation of that plant on the landscape. And so you've kind of got two different scenarios where the plants are still relatively low in terms of the overall time. So you've got a little bit of time, but the population is still relatively low. And one of the key characteristics about having this low population size early on in the infestation is that the cost associated with that also increases with population size. So targeting things in this sector of the invasion curve really saves money and actually inhibits, I jumped way too far, inhibits a lot of that infestation. So early detection is really at this lower end of the invasion curve. And that's really where the best bang for your buck is in terms of the management. That's not to say that management shouldn't occur in these areas, but from a landscape level perspective, really EDRR is the best bang for your buck. And that's what we employ within the Weedwise program. And really, we focus on that kind of technical assistance piece once we get into this, what we call, at this point, we're in kind of an exclusion from, high quality sites, and then we're in more of a maintenance mode for these sorts of things. So it's kind of like eradication, containment, exclusion, and then maintenance. So enough of the laser. So early detection, it really relies upon identifying these populations when they're still relatively small and controlling them before they have a chance to become widespread. So it takes a lot of eyes to get after some of these things. So we spend a lot of time training agency folks, training general public to be able to identify some of the plants that we know we've got an increased risk of coming into the county. So the photo here at the bottom is actually a training we've given the last 3 years in cooperation with the USDA Forest Service, so Mount Hood National Forest, and the Pacific Northwest Invasive Plants Council to actually educate agencies and private landowners and citizen hikers and that sort of thing to identify a lot of our high priority weeds within the county, and then to identify or to report those to folks. And part of this effort is done in cooperation with agencies all throughout the Portland metro region and the Columbia Gorge through our cooperative management areas to really coordinate our lists, coordinate a common messaging amongst folks so that people have a clear understanding of what to do and what to expect. And within this, we also integrate with the Oregon Invasives Hotline. So I'm currently the key contact for the hotline for Clackamas County. So if something's submitted to the Oregon hotline, then it ends up going to me, and we'll work to address those as they come in. And then in addition to the citizen science aspects and agency training aspects, we also do a great deal of on-the-ground survey, both by Weedwise staff as well as contracted field crews. So here's the hotline. I think this website may have actually changed since I initially put this up, but it's very, very simple, very intuitive for folks to go, but the URL is the same. So you can go to OregonInvasivesHotline.org and submit any reports related to noxious weeds in the county. So, and in particular, what are deemed those priority weeds for the county? Those are kind of the highest concerns that we have. I hate to discourage people reporting weeds, but I don't need a whole ton of blackberry calls. I don't need. I know they're there, and if you need help controlling them, I'm more than happy to oblige. But really, the rare stuff is what we really want to. If we see something, we're on it. We're gonna get these things taken care of. So
lower end of the curve there.
Yeah. So, and to follow up with the other portion, so there's that early detection piece, training people to identify these things, and then there's also the rapid response piece, which is, once we find something, to actually get out there, control it. So we do a lot of district-led efforts to control these noxious weeds. We use integrated pest management practices on these things, so it utilizes a number of different control methods to get after these, to really mitigate, any kind of damage to the co-occurring natives or desirable forage in and around the areas, as well as just to, to be more effective in the work that we're doing. And so we coordinate these activities with the private landowners that we're working with, as well as with the public entities that we're coordinating with as well. So, and just, kind of some brief numbers in terms of our rapid response efforts over the last year. So we currently have 1,862 private permissions. So these are permissions to enter private lands to control priority weeds across Clackamas County. Those permissions cover over 109,000 acres of ground that we've looked at or participated in management over the last, I guess our permissions are maybe 6-year timeframes now. And then in the last year, we added, 230 more properties, surveyed, nearly 4,000 acres, and then did treatments over 283 acres of those areas that were heavily infested by priority weeds. So there is a biological control program or component of the WeedWise program as well. So there are a number of state-listed biocontrols that we will periodically move in and around the county. So in particular, thinking about some of the biocontrols related to tansy ragwort, related to Scotch broom, those sorts of things. We will move those around from time to time. This work has historically been undertaken in cooperation with the Oregon Department of Agriculture and USDA APHIS. The ODA biocontrol position has been vacant actually for the last 1.5 to 2 years now, but they just hired a new person for that position. So we're very happy to see that back in place because there are a number of noxious weeds that we're very close to having biocontrols for, and so having that position in place is a very good thing. So we'll work with those through kind of a classical biocontrol. So thinking about, highly specialized insects that will only target these noxious weeds. We will deal with other biocontrol efforts through targeted grazing, as well as through, or something that we've experimented with is use of grass carp in aquatic systems. And that's actually a heavy regulated biocontrol method as well for kind of rural residential ponds with no outlets or access to waterways, and the fish have to be very specially purchased to make sure that they can't enter any water column and that they're sterile. So that is something it's not something I would advise most people to do, but we have had people that have had interest in that. So in addition to kind of the rapid response stuff, the other thing we do is really target on some of our highest priority natural areas that really have very few invasive or noxious weeds. And so in those areas, we will actually target some of our more common plants. So like in some spots, blackberry is something to go after. So if you have a really nice natural area without a lot of heavily infested ground in and around it, you can actually maintain those sites, and that's where you get into that kind of exclusion stage of the management curve that we talked about earlier. So some of the efforts that we've got underway recently is the Clackamas River Invasive Species Partnership that we were able to secure a significant amount of funds to control in some of our priority natural areas in the Clackamas Basin, as well as Newell Creek Canyon. So working in some of those areas with the city and in cooperation with Metro on the adjacent private lands to those areas. So we did some of that work to control tree ivy, in particular in ground ivy. And then also some work in the Bull Run area where really some of those areas, which the photo here is from the Bull Run, just a beautiful area that, can really, for minimal effort can keep that area relatively weed free. So that kind of brings us to the situation where we're here in Oregon City, right? Like you guys are here responsible for, I don't want to say responsible because it's not all on you, but, you're here to help develop policy for the city and to, think about how the Natural Resource Committee can influence noxious weeds within the city. And, one of the biggest things when I think of cities, and we get a lot of calls from, city folks about like, geez, I got this problem, but, I got the problem, but my neighbor's got the real issue over here. And so I get a lot of the neighbor-to-neighbor calls related to these. So I tend to be kind of up on city ordinance related to these because we are non-regulatory. We're not here to kind of slap hands. And really, at the county level, there is no enforcement of noxious weeds. So it really falls on the municipalities if there is going to be an enforcement component to exercise that role. And it is done through city nuisance ordinances. And this is the city nuisance ordinance right here. And it does mention noxious vegetation. But, so this would be an area that I think that the Natural Resource Committee could influence some positive change within the city to update the nuisance ordinance and just modernize it. So these are relatively old language that, really is lacking some, I don't want to belittle the code at all, but, there's some room for improvement, I would say.
Right.
No offense taken.
All right, thank you. And, so just calling out, so the term noxious, so this is where, I spent a little time talking about, specific terms. And the term here, is defined in Oregon City Code. And I think one of the key components to this definition is actually the referencing of the Oregon City nuisance plant list. And I think as a city, that's actually probably one of your greatest management tools in terms of how you can affect change and really find the sweet spot in terms of management within the city. So the nuisance plant list, as I said, is kind of a critical management tool. In terms of the landowner calls that I get from Morgan City, it is typically, like, oh, my neighbor's got blackberry, it's tearing down my fence, or like there's ivy all over the tree and the seeds are spreading into my yard. And so oftentimes I will refer folks to, I recommend you contact Oregon City Code Enforcement to inquire about this. First I say, please talk to your neighbor and have your neighbor call me, and we can give them assistance on how best to control these and be effective in their work. And if that doesn't work, to then contact Code Enforcement. And oftentimes I get a call back, and it'll be like, I contacted Code Enforcement and they said this isn't a noxious weed. And most commonly, in my experience, it's related to ivy. So ivy, and so there seems to be a disconnect because ivy is actually listed as a noxious weed on the Oregon City nuisance list.
Good.
So
I'm going to go look.
but there does seem to be some inconsistency between the code enforcement component and the Oregon City noxious or nuisance list. So that's something to consider. There is that question about whether those common weeds are really, something that should be on the nuisance list. And, one of the considerations is whether, the city itself can manage the properties that it owns and manages, because it's hard for a code enforcement person to say, like, you have to control this when maybe they live next to a city park that's just as heavily infested as their own property. Right. So there needs to be that consideration. And I think that's the practicality that's come to light with the code enforcement folks, where they just kind of have to address it that way. And, I'm projecting to them, of course, but I'm sure you can all reflect on the situation that those folks might have in dealing with these issues. So, and also in terms of the code, the noxious weed code, there's the requirement to come into compliance that's listed in the noxious weed code is really key towards cutting the plant down, and keeping it below 6 inches is defined as being compliant and preventing the spread of these plants into adjacent property. And unfortunately, for a number of plants on the nuisance list, that's just simply not an effective control method. And some of them are less than 6 inches in size and spreading all over the place. So, thinking about how the Natural Resource Committee here can influence really IPM-based practices and more effective control measures related to these, I think is a key component for you guys to maybe consider if you're thinking about doing more work but related to noxious weeds. Yeah.
Are there any cities that are really up to date on that definition and that control aspect? Or not the actual control itself, but what's in the code? Yeah.
So kind of the probably the most noteworthy effort in the area, and what actually a lot of municipalities have done, is they've adopted the Portland Plant List. Yeah. So the Portland Plant List has actually different tiered levels for different noxious weeds. And I think that's actually probably a good approach to really be able to walk your walk and talk your talk if you're a municipality. If you go towards like an A-listed species or a priority listed species for a city, like something on the Portland Plant List, the A-listed is a required eradication. So those tend to be like, for my perspective, I would like to see like, the priority plant list. Like if there was a priority weeds, if those were treated or required eradication in the city, that would be a great scenario. And if it is a Class A noxious weed, then that's a requirement at the state level anyway. So that's kind of the easiest way in terms of coming in compliance, and then having like a graded tier of control. And that's the way the city of Portland has it right now. Is I think three different enforcement levels for noxious weeds, like a required eradication, and then I think like prevent from seeding, and then I may be wrong on that, but I know the required eradication list is relatively small and really geared towards the priority weeds. Mm-hmm. So, apart from the nuisance ordinance, there's definitely the issue of the parks and natural areas within the city. And I know you guys are all very aware of the various issues, and it's, I'm sure, a primary interest that you guys have in trying to figure out a way to address these issues at the city level. But, just to be clear, these areas are heavily impacted by invasive weeds. Oregon City has a pretty significant impact. And I know, Pete, you and I were talking earlier, a lot of the plants that we have are formerly horticultural plants that, because the city has such a rich history, and because our nursery industry, is really, we're at the birthplace of the nursery industry here in Oregon. We've got a lot of old, horticultural plants that have turned invasive, and a long history of them here in the city. So we've kind of got some old growth weeds in Oregon City, and a problem, much greater than a lot of other municipalities as a result. So that's just something to be aware and recognizing that we do have a significant issue. And that, given the current Oregon City Code, the way it is written, it would be my opinion that the parks are not really in compliance with the current code. And that to really to get after those, it will take a significant investment by the city, and really a well thought out process to get those to a manageable level. So, and I think there is some opportunity for the Weedwise program to help the city in some of these respects, and just by making you guys aware of some of the resources that we do have available. We already serve the citizens of Oregon City for technical assistance. So when there are different issues related to noxious weeds, like utilizing us as a resource for landowners. So if there is a code enforcement issue and people are like, I don't know how to kill this stuff, they say I have to get rid of it, but I don't know how. We are here as a resource for folks to, send them our way, and we can help them to develop an effective management strategy to address these things. And we also do the same for our public land managers. So, very often we'll consult on various activities that public land managers are doing and help them to develop effective management strategies for the work that we're doing. And I know we've done similar work with that with the Parks Department here in Oregon City over the years, from time to time, especially during project development. So we are here for that and can do that work. And then also just recognizing that we do maintain the noxious weed list and do maintain, a prioritized list that's well thought out for Clackamas County, and that is a resource for you guys to help you address or think about what you might tackle first if you were going to go after some of the weeds across the city, and where to best get the bang for your buck in terms of these things. So, and then, just prioritizing some of your natural areas, thinking about where some of those things are useful. We can help with that, as well as I'd really recommend the city increasing involvement with the local cooperative weed management areas. In particular, I would say the 4-county cooperative weed management area, to help raise awareness of the land managers managing property in the city. So, and with that, I'm open to a discussion and questions that we've got with the Weedwise program, and thank you guys for having me.
Thank you, Sam. So I think I don't know if you've talked to our Parks and Rec Advisory Committee about this or presented this presentation to them yet, but it might be something to consider in 2018.
Okay.
And Doug Neely is our chair. He serves on both committees. So,
And also the Water Resources Committee, which a lot of them go right through our parks.
Greater Oregon City Watershed.
Which goes through many of our
in terms
parks.
of the entities within the city that control management of public lands, that's the Parks Department with their budget, and the Public Works Department. They're responsible for, 1,300 separate sites. Not
Right.
all. And I think that a majority of those are probably in a better state than the parks side of things. But, I wouldn't know to what extent. Martin Montalvo probably help us with that. He gave a presentation about the landscape contracting that he does every year to keep the storm ponds and the drainage ditches and all this, the street crews and storm crews out there doing that. But yeah, definitely opportunities for collaboration here.
And also
so
nonprofits working with the city.
Yeah.
Like the Oregon City Parks Foundation. I know that they're concentrating on Waterboard Park and then an area in Promenade Park for Zerski and drought tolerant.
Yeah,
things.
and I've been in consultation with Brian Boyce in that effort out at Waterboard Park, and so we're going to try to
There's a big
assist
push
with
on
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they did get some Metro funds to help address some of those issues. And I mean, we were talking Waterboard Park is just, it's a great little spot, but heavily impacted in that area. And so, thinking about some of those ways, and I know they're doing a good job of, of trying to find solutions to the issue. I mean, it really is a resource limitation issue, and trying to figure out a way to really maximize the benefit. I think there's something
If we
to that.
concentrate on something like that and people see it, they're going to go, well, it's maybe our city it's just such a big task. We'll have to help too.
Yeah.
I know I'm trying to get Cliffside people that Boulder, so they'll go down and trim some of those trees. I mean, they're the ones with the guts and the equipment to do it. But how do you get them? Kind of hard, but you keep pestering.
No, this is excellent, and I really appreciate you talking about how this committee can actually. I think for us to look at these definitions would be fairly easy, and updating our weed ordinance would be a fairly easy task as well. So we do actually refer people to the Portland plant list and the invasives hotline for that sort of thing. So I apologize for any
Well, maybe we can adopt those.
BlackBerry
links.
complaints, but so that's a good resource, and I actually referred a lady to that the other day. So thank you
But
very
maybe
much.
we can adopt those onto our website, so we can adapt. We want theirs.
Yeah,
on
there's
ours.
always opportunities to improve the information.
So yeah, I mean, and definitely the weedwise.conservationdistrict.org subdomain. So we've got a lot of our BMPs on there, and our best management practices for controlling some of these more common weeds. So it's a great resource that folks can kind of go to and really think like, oh well, how do I do blackberry? If there's ever questions, and it's to me it seems like I totally know, but I live, drink, and eat this stuff every day. So it's that sort of thing. So sending people to our website as a resource for folks, it's a lot of exhaustive material really, and kind of thinking along those lines. If anything in the city, and kind of feeding into Rodney's discussion earlier, really trying to preserve that canopy layer. I mean, that's honestly like the kind of the lowest hanging fruit, literally, of where the city could affect some change. Just handling the tree ivy, the clematis, in particular, those two plants to preserve the dominant trees that are there now. I mean, there's definitely a lot of don't get me wrong. There's a lot of noxious weeds on the ground as well that are important, but just trying to preserve some of that canopy layer, I think would be resources well spent as a first priority.
There's really some very rare plants down inside that waterboard and trillium were this big.
Yeah.
This big.
So I gotta say, a few years back, Sam, you planted some street trees, but you didn't do a typical planting. You did a
So I did kind of the proto backyard habitat because it wasn't something available. So I think that was the first time I met Pete. Was actually we had bought a house in Oregon City, and I believe there was two Norway maples planted in the planting strip, and they were diseased. And I recall being like, well, these going up to planting, I'm like, I want to remove these Norway maples because they have a tendency to spread. And at the time I recalled, like, oh no, those plants are fine. They're not, they're on our approved street tree list, and if it's a bad one, it would be on our nuisance list. So they showed me the approved street tree list, and there's Norway maple, and then on the nuisance plant list, it was on the nuisance plant list also. So it was one of those things, and so I think that was the first time I had talked with Pete.
That's kind of story.
And I didn't want to wear my work hat, into the thing, but so we had a conversation, and it got corrected. So that was really actually a good thing to do. But so in my plantings, there were some old Christmas Christmas trees on the property. It was a renovated Christmas tree. And so we wanted to thin some out just for tree health because they were in way too tight. And so removed those and did all native planting. So did more understory tree species in the same area to mitigate for the trees that were removed.
Yeah.
So an all native. So we did kind of a backyard habitat before backyard habitat is available here. So I should get my silver certification right out of the gate. So
In the
Mass
mail.
Backyard
That's
Habitat,
okay.
if they would put some examples and kind of a demonstration garden in maybe one of our parks or two.
Yeah, I think
That'd be like just valuable.
the follow-up with the Backyard Habitat Program was a meeting that we had with Public Works staff and water quality staff, Gail and Martin and other folks with them. So a lot of interest in that program and expanding that in Oregon City 2018 and beyond. So.
Well, definitely the storm, from the city's perspective, I mean, the stormwater aspects associated with backyard habitat are a huge selling point, in my mind, for the city and the benefits that you guys can realize from that. So I'm a strong advocate. Like I say, my program's been supporting the expansion into Clackamas County, and we're supporting the expansion into Oregon City. But we're looking for local partners to support that effort in the long term, and there is a benefit to the city from participating in that. So I'd strongly encourage the city to think hard about participating in that. And I think you guys are seeing it with the Friends of Trees expansion as well in a very similar way. And actually, Susie, I believe, was previously worked for Friends of Trees, so she shares that culture coming into the city as well. So it's good.
Nice.
Great. All right. Well,
Thank you guys.
Thank you very much for coming.
Thanks.
Thanks, everybody. All right. Good luck with your grants.
Yeah. Good luck getting them done in time. That's
Yeah.
the real issue.
Yeah. All right, let's see where we're at. I think we just probably skip ahead to communications, and then if you guys have any other ideas. We don't have any old business or new business to discuss at this point in time. I could give you a brief update about the Friends of Trees planting. That was a big success. We had a good turnout, very wet day, and it was on the heels of a very, very wet period. So a lot of the tree holes were filled with water. You had to bail some of the areas out, especially the clay soils. Did bring up the issue kind of whether the tree list that we have should be better tailored towards the soil types that we have in Oregon City, which include a lot of clay and that sort of thing. And the last time we adopted the street tree list, just as a resolution process, it's not a big deal to do it, but we need some expert feedback on that. Friends of Trees expressed interest in helping us with that. So,
That's a great idea.
yeah. Because we don't want to have people planting trees that aren't going to survive and
Right.
thrive, and so maybe, and that ties in also with the native discussion, I think, as well. So we've got some videos and photographs that are on the Friends of Trees website of that day, and I
I
think
saw it. You took a picture of my neighbor's house.
yeah.
I nominated him.
And that's going to be we signed a contract with Friends of Trees for the next 3 years.
Oh, good.
So that we're going to be doing another neighborhood planting next year and just expanding out in the other neighborhoods. And then also doing a pruning workshop in Oregon City.
Oh, that'd be interesting.
And then a parkway type planting, which we have a to be determined location. And then going into 2019. So we keep rolling the mitigation tree fund over into that program. And it's excellent because they do all of the outreach and coordination and training and empowerment that the city doesn't have the resources to do. And it's working really well. So good on that. And then planning department is incredibly busy right now. You guys probably, for this time of year,
I'm seeing lots of stuff. Like,
Yeah, we've got a lot of interest in multifamily housing development, a lot of interest in residential development in general. Also, quite a bit of commercial development happening. With we've got an interest in a hotel that's hopefully going to go in Washington Street, across from the end of the Oregon Trail Center. And then, as far as Clackamas Cove and the Rivers project, the Willamette Falls Legacy project, Clackamas Cove project is looking at doing what they call phase 2 and 3, which is along the waterfront of the cove with more mixed use, but predominantly apartments and some ground floor retail and commercial areas. And that would be a significant expansion of housing in the downtown area. And I think they're looking to get Planning Commission approval in 2018. I don't know if they'll actually start construction, but it involves improving Agnes Street to a much higher, more pedestrian-friendly street than it is now. And that would be coming off of Main Street, which has
what
just
made
been
that
improved.
street just wave the way it has, Old Agnes Street?
Yeah, it'll change a lot. The new alignment is already, it's going to be straighter, but it comes to a roundabout and dead ends. It's not allowed to connect to ODOT 213 because of they don't have the, we
I
don't
was
have
just wondering
access.
what made the whole Agnes Street, that used to be that big, long, waving,
Oh,
wavy
yeah.
road street that your kids go, step on it. And I go, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
No, I was just wondering what that was, that
I
underground
don't
water, was it
know.
because it
There
was
was-
landfill or?
They're part of it is a landfill, and then part of it had an old railroad right of way, which wasn't landfill, so that never was affected by the landfill. So, but I think the extent of the landfill probably comes into the northern part of the project, and they've done borings and soil tests all over that area, so they know pretty much the extent of the landfill, and they don't want to be doing any uncovering of any landfill. And so
They
they're
want to
staying
do
clear of
surprises.
that. So, I mean, yeah, I won't get into too much detail on that. But that'll be something that is on the work plan for the NRC, is to provide guidance on the natural resources aspect of that project, where they're going to be coming back in the latter phases and doing enhancement of the cove as a habitat area all around the cove, to the extent that they can. And, the project will, as part of the development funding, include that rehabilitation. So John Runyon gave a presentation to us this year about.
He's probably due to give us another one, isn't he? Another
Yeah, at
6
some
months or
point I
so?
think he will, because we're getting closer to
Yeah.
a design. Yeah. All right.
That's that project that you saw everything go from juniper and star magnolia to natural habitat. That's a real success story, and letting people hear, the contractors having to hear people's opinion and habitat opinion.
Yeah, sure.
And really just took not very many people to make that kind of change happen. And then they found resource monies for.
The challenge is going to be, because the banks of the cove are so steep, and they have to do what they call balance cut and fill for there's going to be some grading involved. And so a lot of the existing cottonwoods are going to probably have to be removed. in
Oh,
order
I
to
thought they said they
accommodate that.
saved like 200 or 197, and they were. And they
Yeah,
were,
and there may be some areas where they don't have to.
yeah.
Yeah.
I thought
So,
they saved the
yeah.
majority of them or something. I just remember there was a whole flip flop.
But it's coming back for review, so.
Yeah.
Yep. All right, thank you. Any questions for me? And you guys want to talk about your stuff? real quick?
Well, I'll talk about our Oregon City Public Pool is having an open house. And I know that they sure would like to have people come along, and it's very family oriented, and it's on January 5th at our swimming pool from 4:30 to 9 p.m. welcome for families. It'll do all
Great.
kinds of bingo, rotation, water exercise classes, blah, 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 blah. And it's going to be fun, so get our community there. I have another public service announcement. Oregon City Parks Foundation is having a benefit auction, and it will be benefiting, direct proceeds for that will benefit Waterboard Park ivy removal and the drought-tolerant Zerski planting along Promenade.
Oh, cool.
And that's on
Yeah.
January 20th at the Hive Tap House.
January 20th at
Yep.
the,
And all proceeds are going to go right here in our Oregon City.
Okay.
Staying in the park. They could use some more auction donations
okay,
there. That's a
great,
plug.
yeah, thanks. At the tap, which tap
God,
house?
Our library has had the coolest movies lately, too. I've been going to the movies at our park, and they're great history movies. Sign up on that.
Looking at that.
So I'm
So I
gonna
guess I've done
say-
as many
all right.
plugs as I can. You got a plug?
I don't have a plug. I need to get some.
I give you some. Well, thank you very much. I think I can just keep squeaking at you guys. Careful. I'll let my hair down. You won't know who I am. I'll put a hat on.
And you put it in the right folder here.
And future agenda. What Jerry would really, really like to see is Rich Winterhalter.
Rick Winterhalter,
Yeah,
recycling.
yeah, with
the
recycling
Clackamas
and
County
the Clackamas
Recycling.
Community Solve.
Yeah, okay.
And on the Express, he would really like to know their opinion of what's going on with our recycling, regionally and nationally. With the Japanese not being interested, what's going to happen to it? Or is there a solution at all? What do they think? Because people are beginning to panic. What's going on with it all?
Thanks. Yeah. So, let's see. I guess we'll adjourn. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Again, appreciate you coming.